My parents ignored my older sister's cruel bullying for years, so I finally decided to move out at 18. 6 years later, they reached out, hoping we could reconcile, but their plan backfired. My older sister, Rose, had been a relentless bully throughout my life, making it incredibly painful and difficult to live with her. Rose has ADHD, and her constant hyperactivity and aggressiveness made her a very challenging person to share a home with, especially during our childhood. When I was born, Rose was already 5 years old, and her reaction to my arrival was anything but warm or welcoming. From the beginning, she struggled with the attention I received from our parents. While it's common for older siblings to feel jealous or displaced by a new baby, Rose's feelings ran exceptionally deep. She would throw dramatic tantrums whenever my parents spent any time with me, as though my very existence offended her. Throughout my childhood, all I remember is Rose taking all my toys. She would grab them without hesitation. Birthdays, which should have been happy moments for me, turned into chaotic events. Rose would scream, cry, and create such a scene that she completely overshadowed my celebrations. Instead of feeling cherished on my special day, I often felt humiliated because of her actions. As I grew older, her behavior became even more focused and hurtful. She began taking her frustrations out on me physically. Sometimes, she would shove me out of her way for no reason, and other times, she would bite me, a deliberate act that felt cruel and unkind. It became clear that her resentment for me wasn't just a phase. It felt like she deeply disliked me for stealing the attention she once had with our parents. Rose didn't have any friends, and my parents, in their effort to make her feel included, arranged playdates. However, these gatherings, which should have been enjoyable, often turned into stressful situations where I had to mediate or apologize for her behavior. Over time, I couldn't help but feel a strong sense of resentment toward my sister. I didn't understand why she couldn't behave like other people or why she couldn't control her emotions. She didn't seem to like me, often picking fights and making me feel like an outsider in my own home. Living with her was confusing and painful. I longed for a sister who would protect and support me, not one who constantly tormented me and made me feel unwanted. What made it even worse was my parents' lack of empathy toward me. They absolutely adored Rose and seemed completely oblivious to how her bullying affected me. Whenever I tried to express my feelings or explain how much her actions hurt me, they brushed it off. They would tell me that Rose was special and needed my constant understanding and patience. Even though I was the younger one, I was always expected to accommodate Rose's needs and moods, even if it came at the expense of my own happiness. I remember when I turned 13, I desperately wanted to have a special trip with just my parents and me. I spent days begging and pleading, trying to convince them to make it happen. After much negotiation, they finally agreed. The plan was simple. Rose would stay with our grandparents for 3 days, and I would finally have my moment. But when Rose found out, she had a massive meltdown. She cried inconsolably for hours, yelled through things, and even got in my face, screaming threats like she would kill me for trying to take our parents away from her. It was honestly terrifying and overwhelming to see her anger aimed at me with such intensity. Instead of standing up for me, my parents began pleading with me to let Rose join the trip. They tried reasoning with me, saying it was the only way to calm her down. At first, I resisted, knowing deep down that her presence would ruin the trip I had dreamed of. But with Rose raging uncontrollably and my parents desperate, I felt I had no choice but to give in. Once again, her behavior dictated the outcome, and I was left to adjust. As I feared, bringing Rose turned the trip into another disaster. From the moment we arrived at Disneyland, she refused to enjoy anything like other kids. She wouldn't go on any of the rides and clung to my mother's side the entire time. She constantly complained about the crowds, saying how much she hated everything. Her screams and cries quickly became the center of attention, overshadowing the excitement I had been looking forward to for weeks. Within just 2 hours, Rose was begging my parents to take her back to the hotel, completely unraveling what was supposed to be a magical day. In the end, my parents had to split up to manage the situation. My mother drove Rose back to the hotel, while my father stayed with me, trying to salvage what little was left of the day. While I appreciated my dad's effort, the entire experience felt ruined. Instead of the joyful, carefree celebration I had envisioned, my birthday was once again defined by Rose's tantrums and needs taking precedence. I know my parents truly did their best given the circumstances, but it was painfully obvious that Rose's needs always came before mine. She demanded their attention 24/7, and no matter what I did, I was always an afterthought. While they believed they were doing the right thing for Rose, it often left me feeling invisible, as though my feelings and needs didn't matter. By the time I turned 17, I had reached my breaking point. Rose's constant bullying and my parents' continued disregard for how it affected me had become too much to bear. I began dreaming of freedom, of finally living a life where I wasn't overshadowed by my sister's needs or my parents' expectations. I started applying to colleges, focusing specifically on ones far away from home. When my parents found out about my plans, they were furious. They didn't understand, or perhaps refused to see, why I felt the need to leave. They begged me to stay in our hometown, arguing that Rose needed me, that as her sibling, I had a responsibility to be there for her. I argued that I didn't care about Rose, and that I would keep applying to colleges far from home, no matter how they felt. That's when my parents revealed the real reason they wanted me to stay. Their plan after retirement was to travel and enjoy their lives while leaving me with 100% responsibility for Rose. They explained how they had been sacrificing their lives for years and believed it was now my turn to step up. First of all, they had never consulted me about this long-term plan, nor had I ever given them any reason to think I'd be willing to take responsibility for my sister. Secondly, I had no intention of becoming her caretaker. I wasn't her parent, and it felt completely unfair and unreasonable for them to place this burden on me. I made my stance as clear as possible. I suggested that they could still enjoy their retirement and go on cruises or other trips without Rose if they made alternative arrangements. I recommended options like hiring a full-time caretaker or helping Rose become more independent, even if only for a few days at a time. My mom argued that Rose would never feel comfortable with a caretaker and insisted that she required 24/7 monitoring, which, according to her, only a family member, specifically me, could provide. My dad agreed with her, even going so far as to call me selfish for refusing to go along with their plan. His comment hurt deeply, but what came next shattered me. He revealed that the only reason they had me, their second child, was so I could eventually grow up and take care of Rose. I froze. My mind spun as the weight of his words sank in. I stared at them in silence, my eyes wide with disbelief. My mom quickly intervened, scolding my dad for revealing that secret and urging him to apologize. She tried to backtrack, claiming he didn't really mean it and that, of course, they loved me too. But her words felt empty. The damage was done. I couldn't unhear what my dad had said. In that moment, everything became clear. I finally understood why I had always felt invisible compared to my sister. The idea that my existence had been planned as a solution for Rose's care, rather than as a person with my own dreams and aspirations, was devastating. My mom kept insisting that Rose needed help, but her words only made the sting worse. As part of the family, my mom argued I had a duty to care for Rose. She even claimed that going to college far away wouldn't improve my life in any meaningful way. According to her, staying in our hometown was the better option. Living at home, she reasoned, would save me money on rent and other expenses. I understood that Rose had a condition, but did that mean I wasn't entitled to a life of my own? Did I have to sacrifice my future just because she existed? The thought was suffocating. I didn't argue much with my parents at that moment, knowing it wouldn't change their minds. Instead, I felt more determined than ever to leave. I ignored their pleas and threw myself even deeper into my college applications, driven by a stronger resolve to escape. It wasn't easy, but I worked tirelessly, and in the end, my efforts paid off. I was accepted into a good college that made the leap worthwhile. When I shared the news with my parents, they were furious. They outright refused to let me go and did everything they could to guilt-trip me into staying. Although I was 18 by this time, I knew I needed external help to break away from their control. So, I turned to my grandparents, calling them and pleading for their support. My grandmother, who had always been a steady and loving presence in my life, immediately came over to help. She packed my bags and important documents and offered me a place to stay with her and my grandfather until it was time for me to leave for college. But my parents didn't stop there. They threatened to cut me off financially and refused to help with any of my college expenses. They warned that if I left, I would be entirely on my own and that they would sever ties with me forever. Even then, I didn't back down. I took out a student loan to fund my education. On top of that, my grandfather stepped in, offering to cover part of my expenses with his retirement savings. It broke my heart to accept his help, knowing how hard he and my grandmother had worked for that money. They were doing what my parents should have been doing, offering love, encouragement, and support. The next 4 years of my life were a blur of hard work and determination. College was challenging, not just academically, but also emotionally. While most of my classmates had supportive parents and enough money to enjoy social activities, I didn't have the same privileges. I spent almost every day studying as hard as I could to keep up. To support myself financially, I took on a part-time job as a server, juggling long shifts and late nights alongside my coursework. Those years were far from easy, but I pushed through because I knew what was at stake. I had no other choice. Meanwhile, my parents never reached out to me, not even once, to see how I was doing or if I needed any help. Their silence was deafening. At times, I questioned my worth, wondering if I truly deserved to be abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Despite these doubts, I refused to give up. I reminded myself that as long as I kept moving forward, I could eventually build a life of my own. After graduating, I was incredibly fortunate to land an amazing job. It was the opportunity one had been working so hard for, and it felt like the first real reward for all the sacrifices I had made over the years. With this job, I was finally able to start paying off my student loans. More importantly, I began repaying the money my grandfather had given me when my parents wouldn't help. Although he had never expected me to pay him back, it was a gift of love, not a loan. It mattered deeply to me to ease his burden and show him that his faith in me had not been misplaced. I continue to share a close and loving relationship with my grandparents. Whenever I can, I book tickets for them to visit me and make sure they know how much I appreciate everything they've done for me. This year, however, I began hearing troubling stories about my sister from my grandparents. It seems Rose's behavior has escalated over the years. Since I was no longer her target, she had turned her bullying tendencies toward other people. My grandparents told me that Rose had started harassing neighborhood kids. Apparently, she had been throwing water at them whenever they played outside and trying to intimidate them by yelling that they weren't allowed to play in her area. Unsurprisingly, the parents of these children became concerned and began complaining to my parents, pleading with them to address Rose's behavior. Here's the rewritten version of this part of your story. The neighborhood parents demanded that Rose be kept away from their children, but as usual, my parents didn't take any effective action. They assumed that Rose would eventually get bored and stop, but her antics continued. The situation escalated when one of the parents, fed up with her constant bullying, called the police. When the officers arrived, they witnessed Rose throwing water at one of the kids and yelling at her to run for her life. Rose was immediately arrested for harassing minor children. My parents protested, but the police reprimanded them for failing to control Rose's behavior. While this news shocked some of my relatives, it didn't surprise me at all. I had witnessed her unchecked behavior for years, fully aware that my parents were more interested in making excuses for her than holding her accountable. Still, Seeing my sister face legal trouble was a harsh reminder of how troubling her behavior had become. My parents bailed her out, but now Rose is facing an upcoming court case. This week, I received a call from my parents, which completely caught me off guard. After 6 years of silence, it felt surreal to see their number appear on my phone. When I answered, my dad told me how he and my mom were at their wits' end dealing with my sister. He said they wanted to reconcile with me, claiming they had missed me for years, but were too angry and stubborn to contact me after I left for college. His words felt like an attempt to rewrite history, glossing over years of hurt and abandonment with a hollow apology. I could already sense that they had ulterior motives for reaching out, so I asked him to get to the point. That's when my dad explained that, with my sister's impending court case, they were finally beginning to see the truth, that perhaps I had been right all along about Rose. Reluctantly, my dad admitted that my sister was indeed a bully and that her behavior had worsened over the years since I left. He shared how she had been getting into more and more trouble. He told me that he and my mom had talked and now felt sorry for everything I had endured. He admitted they should have listened to me more back then. My dad even said they were finally willing to send Rose to therapy so she could get the help she clearly needed. Hearing those words from him felt almost surreal, especially after all the years I had spent begging my parents to take action against my sister's behavior, only to be dismissed or told to understand her. My dad continued, saying they wanted to meet with me and apologize in person if I was willing to listen. As calmly as I could, I told my dad that while I was glad they were finally getting Rose the help she needed, the truth was I didn't care anymore. Too much time had passed without them bothering to contact me, and over the years, I had come to terms with their absence. I had built a life that no longer included them. I made it clear that I wasn't willing to reconcile with them when my dad tried to push back, urging me to reconsider my decision. I firmly stood my ground. Now, I'm wondering, am I the AITA if I don't reconcile with my family after the way they've treated me for years? To clarify a few things, as I can't reply to every comment. For anyone asking, no, my sister was never bullied at school. She attended a specialized school designed for kids with needs similar to hers. It was a very small, closely monitored environment with only a handful of special needs students. The teachers there were wonderful and took excellent care of her, ensuring that bullying was not an issue. On top of that, my parents were always actively involved in her life, frequently checking in with her teachers and attending meetings. There's absolutely no way Rose was bullied at school or that it contributed to her behavior towards me. The truth is, her issues stem from how she was allowed to act at home. She was consistently mean to me, and my parents never held her accountable for her actions. If she bit, slapped, or shoved me, there were no repercussions. Instead, I was always the one expected to pacify her or be more understanding of her behavior. As for why Rose was never sent to therapy, the simple truth is that therapy was always too expensive for my parents to consider. But beyond that, my mom has always been extremely possessive when it comes to Rose. She never allowed Rose to spend much time with anyone else, believing that only she truly understood Rose's needs. As a result, Rose became overly dependent on my mom, who continued to make all her decisions. Now that I've read through all the comments under my post, it's clear to me why my parents are reaching out after all this time. The answer is obvious. They need my help with my sister's upcoming case. I suspect they want me to offer a character reference for Rose if the court requires it, or maybe they're hoping I'll contribute financially to her lawyer fees, given that I now have a good job and a stable income. After years of ignoring me, it can't just be about wanting to reconnect out of love or remorse. It feels like desperation. They probably want me to step in and help them fix things, especially with Rose's legal trouble. They're hoping I'll act like the dutiful son and support them in this mess. But I've made up my mind. I'm not going to do that. For those asking how my grandparents feel about my parents wanting to reconnect with me, they're not exactly thrilled about my parents wanting to reconnect. Over the years, my grandparents haven't really kept in touch with my parents, especially after everything that happened when I was kicked out and wanted to go to college. Since then, the relationship between them has been strained, and they've mostly kept their distance. The only reason my grandparents still communicate with my parents is that they sometimes help out with Rose, whether it's babysitting or caring for her when my parents need assistance. They know exactly what Rose is like and have seen her behavior firsthand. They're disappointed in how my parents have handled everything over the years. My grandparents have always supported me, but when it comes to Rose, they've never excused her actions. So, with my parents now wanting to reconnect, my grandparents have made it clear that they understand my hesitation. They've asked me to be cautious, knowing how hurt I've been by my parents. They don't want me rushing into something that might cause more pain. Okay, so my suspicions about my parents were right. Today, I finally agreed to a video call with them after they had been asking for weeks. It had been so long since we last saw each other, and honestly, I was feeling a mix of emotions leading up to the call. When I finally saw them on the screen, I couldn't help but notice how different they looked. They appeared much older than I remembered, tired, worn out, even. It broke my heart a little seeing them that way. Despite all the emotions swirling inside me, I tried to keep my composure. We talked about their lives, how things had been for them, and I shared a little about my work. We discussed my grandparents and caught up on the little things happening in our family. The conversation felt almost normal, like no time had passed since I had last seen them. My parents apologized again. They seemed almost desperate in their words, asking me to visit them and promising they had been thinking about me. But at that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. I asked them outright, why now? After all this time, if you really miss me, why didn't you reach out during college, when I was away and needed your support? You made no effort to stay in touch. What's different now? Why are you suddenly so eager to reconnect? That's when my parents reluctantly started to reveal the real reason they had reached out. They explained that they were in desperate need of financial help to take care of my sister, Rose. My dad told me that over the years, they had spent almost all of their savings on Rose's constant medical treatments. The costs had drained them, and now, with her legal case pending and the potential therapy she would need for her behavioral issues, the financial burden was becoming overwhelming. My dad finally asked me, almost pleadingly, if I could perhaps start sending them some money every month since I was doing so well in life. My mom quickly chimed in, making it clear that the money would only be used for Rose, nothing else. I shook my head in response, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Voice trembling with frustration, I asked him, "Do you seriously think I would just send you my hard-earned money to spend on Rose?" I struggled to hold back my anger. No matter how much you need it, how could I possibly help you with her? She's the one who bullied me all those years. She's the one who made my life hell. She's the one who ruined every single birthday celebration I ever had. My voice cracked as I continued. She's the one who never once showed any sympathy or care for me. So why would I help her now? The history between me and Rose was so painful, and now they wanted me to step in and be the financial savior for someone who had treated me with such cruelty. It didn't make sense, and I couldn't let go of the years of hurt. I didn't stop there. All my frustration and years of bottled-up resentment came rushing out. I pointed out to my parents that they had never protected me from Rose. They had never shown me any real compassion when it came to her. Instead, they just expected me to fall in line, to play along with their narrative, and take care of her as if everything she did was something I had to accept. I was a child, and I needed their protection, but they had failed me multiple times. I pointed out that even though Rose has ADHD, it doesn't mean she shouldn't be held accountable for her actions. Now that she's a grown woman, I blamed my parents and made it clear that if they had actually gotten her proper help when she was younger, maybe things would have been different today. Maybe she would have turned out to be a better person. Someone capable of understanding the hurt she sometimes causes others. But they hadn't. They had let her get away with so much that she ended up getting arrested for harassing young children. Even after all this, they were asking me to step in and help her. as if I wasn't her first victim. My parents tried to argue back, but I told them that although I appreciated their apology, it didn't mean I was going to just forgive and forget everything that had happened. Hearing this, my parents backed down. They told me that regardless of whether or not I could help them financially, they still wanted to continue working on our relationship. My mom told me that she wished she and Dad had made different choices back then, but since they couldn't change the past, they wanted to be there for me in any way they could from now on. On one hand, I appreciated their willingness to move forward, but on the other, I wasn't sure. I wasn't ready to let go of all the pain that had lingered for so long. I asked my parents for some time to think things through. Sorry for the delay. It's been a month since my last update. My sister has been ordered to attend court-mandated counseling, which I suppose is a step in the right direction. My parents also had to pay a hefty fine because of what Rose did to harass those kids. Honestly, I thought her punishment would be more severe. But I guess the judge showed some leniency since this was Rose's first official offense. On top of everything, some of the parents of the children involved have taken out a restraining order against my sister. Now, Rose is legally required to stay far away from all their kids. If she violates that order, she'll be arrested. As for my parents, since that conversation where I refused to offer them financial help, they haven't brought it up again. We continue to talk, but it's only about small, trivial things. I guess they really meant their words and are just trying to mend their relationship with me. While I'm happy to be somewhat present in their lives again, I'm not ready to dive back into a full relationship with them, especially not with Rose. I think I will never forgive her, no matter how much time passes. The things she did to me, bullying me, making my life miserable for so many years, are things that can't just be erased. I hope that with counseling, she'll finally begin to hold herself accountable for her actions. Honestly, I'm not sure how long that will take, or if it will ever happen,